Good afternoon, everyone. I think we're going to get started again. So my name is Melina Healey, and it's my pleasure to be the moderator for the education panel this afternoon. I'm going to give you the starting CLE code. That is F as in father, M as in mother, S as in snake, 1, 2, 3. That's F, M, S, 1, 2, 3. All right, and this conference has just been incredible so far, and it's my great privilege to be moderating this panel, and I will tell you that I am a clinical professor here at Touro, and my clinic represents children with disabilities in special education proceedings. And Judge Bianco and Judge Preska this morning spoke so powerfully for the need for creative lawyering in those sorts of cases. And one of the reasons I had to listen to that panel and a couple of the other panels this morning on Zoom is because I was with two of my students in a CSE meeting in one of our local schools. And that means they were representing a family in obtaining IEP services for their child with disability. And I am very grateful that this panel has a distinguished group of not only an attorney, but two educational experts. And one of the reasons is that good creative lawyering in special education requires that good lawyers engage with other experts. And that's something that I learned from Sam Levine. When I first arrived at Touro, he said, I'm going to hook you up with people from the Graduate School of Health Sciences, and they're going to enrich your representation. And truly, my partnership that Sam created has done that. So I think it's wonderful that Sam has put this particular panel together. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce those panelists to you. Their full and distinguished bios are available in your program materials. The first person who will be presenting is Dr. Evelyn Ansah Karkkulainen, who is a postdoctoral researcher in educational sciences from the University of Eastern Finland. And she has a presentation for you that she will give. Each of the panelists will present for 15 minutes, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. I will introduce the other two panelists after Dr. Karkkulainen does her presentation. Take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Sam, for the invitation, and thank you for the opportunity. As she said, I'm from Finland, and basically my work is on inclusive education and special education. I also work with the Ministry of Education in Finland as education expert in development cooperation. So we train teachers, we prepare teachers professional development in the area of well-being, special ed, and also international collaboration. So I'm here to give you a little data about a study that we did in disability studies on how we give feedback. In Finnish education or in Finnish vocational education, feedback is not only pedagogy, it's also seen as a legal right, mandate for teachers or students. So we did a study to find out what is going on in the vocational education. Are these policies or the student have the right to feedback during their studies, or is just something that is not being adhered to? So the study was done, was it 2020 to 2023? And then we collected data samples from teachers and then trainers from 6 vocational schools in different study fields in Finland. Move forward. Yes, I had some video, but fortunately we cannot play the video. So we'll just use the slides. The main purpose for this study was to look at what feedback does. The whole morning we heard about creating environment, inclusive mindset, relationship building, acceptance. I heard a new word, neuro-inclusive. is very important. Support system and learning support, educating society, conscientizing advocacy. These are some words that I heard this morning. And in as much as we are all educators, we are all working to make sure there's inclusive learning environment. I want us to ask ourselves, when we are working with people with disability, do we even take their opinions, we take their concerns into considerations? Or do we think that because they have disability, they don't have any right, or they don't have any right to feedback to what we do, or the kind of services that we give them? So that was the basis of this study. As I mentioned earlier, with the Finnish legislation, you can see there was, let me see what. Yes, there was a reform in 2017 to 2018 about the legal mandate or legislation for feedback for students in Finnish vocational education. And in this case, we realized that, per our data, we realized that there was the legislature, but then students were complaining that the teachers don't give them feedback. And teachers were also not happy how they can give feedback to students. Of course, they wanted to give the feedback, but then how teachers are supported to be able to give the right feedback to students. So in this case, we had, yes, and the Finnish system or the Finnish education model, it's based on inclusive model. We also have the competence-based, and it's based on the policy foundation, and it's also a dual learning system. That is, the dual learning system is, if you are in Finnish vocational school, you can have your certificate either at the school, or you can also train at the workplace learning. It's not, learning is not always done in school, but you can also be at the workplace learning and also have a certificate. I go into that. What was these were some of the theories we used in supporting this study. About the cognitive theory, we also talked about the self-regulated learning and the constructive learning and the feedback loop model. About the methodology section, we had 39 teachers and then 15 trainers that participated in this study. I'll just move to the how this data was transcribed, and we also use in vivo to be able to analyze the data. These were the main point that came out from this study. What the teachers were saying when we went to the field after this qualitative study, teachers made mention of the fact that they had difficulty in making feedback accessible to students with learning difficulties or learning disabilities. And then especially students with diverse learning needs, like I said. And the students also needing processing time, because when you give a feedback to students who has sort of disability, you need time to be able to let the student understand what you are giving. But the teachers don't have that kind of time. It's also something that also concerns them. And then the teachers also mentioned that the current system, feedback system that they are using, does not support students who have diverse learning needs like ADHD or ADD or dyscalculia and so on. But they also mentioned that written feedback also become complex for the student to understand. So it means they were giving feedback to students based on the students' work, but they thought that it was not enough. So in the end, they made mention of the fact that they also needed some training, some sort of professional training to be able to help them to it's okay. Yes. And then these were some challenges that trainers were having during the study, they also said that some of the trainers in the vocational school were unaware of the disability of the student. And they even mentioned that if a student has some sort of disability and they are trainers, they don't know what kind of disability they have. How can they support this student? So it was also something that was shocking to me because I've done a lot of study with the vocational schools and I'm not, but when we asked, they said that it was because of if the student herself is able to disclose to the trainer that he has some sort of disability, then it's okay, but the teacher, or they don't have the right to disclose. So it's sort of some ethical issues, yeah. And then trainers also needed support on how to support students, how to give students sort of feedback. And feedback sometimes perceived by as discouraging, unfair, that is perceived by students. Because last year I was presenting what the student opinion, and now it's the turn of teachers and trainers. What is something? Yes. So how do we bridge between policy and practice when we want to have a better inclusive learning system in our educational system? Not seeing only giving feedback as pedagogy, but also bridging that policy and practice. So in this case, we realize that when we have a training, we train teachers to be able to handle feedback system, how they are able to give feedback, because feedback is also very important. We don't, in our work, we don't think that somebody has a disability, and for that matter, when we want to decide on their behalf, when they do something, because students were worried that teachers normally say everything is okay, but they themselves also realized that, yes, something is not right, but the teacher said, yes, everything is okay. And also, teachers also were worried because they don't have, it was kind of difficult to hurt. They are thinking of if they give a feedback, even if it's constructive feedback, it might be that you are hurting the student. So it also has to do with the training, what kind of professional training that teachers need or trainers also need to be able to support this student. And issue of institutional framework in Finnish education is also known, especially the vocational school. I know that they have really a good support system. Even last year, 1st August, we have a new learning support system that started last year, August, and it's been extended to this year to vocational school, 1st August. So I will end here by saying that towards inclusive and effective feedback, what can help our educational system? That is, when we are working with people with disabilities, learning difficulties, what can we do? We don't always presume that somebody has a disability, they don't have the right to give their opinion or to whatever. It doesn't matter what we are doing for them. We need to make sure we take them into consideration. And we don't just think that we can, whatever we want is what we want to give them, but also giving them the opportunity. In a way, we are all creating the inclusive learning environment for them to be able to feel safe in that environment. So thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, our next panelist is Dr. Jeff Lichtman. He is the Director of Student Mental Health Services, an Assistant Professor, and Lucille Weidman, Program Chair, the Jewish Childhood Education and Special Education Graduate School of Education, an Assistant Professor of Education, Lander College of Arts and Sciences. So broadly expert across divisions in Touro, and it's our privilege to hear from him.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be here. And thanks to everybody, and especially Sam for working tirelessly to put this conference together and give us the opportunity to be together. So as a psychologist, as an educator, I have, I guess, certain insights and perspectives. Most of my career I spent working in the Jewish community, not exclusively, but in the Jewish community, and working around and with children especially, and people with special needs, people with disabilities. But perhaps most importantly, I have 3 adult children. One of them, my son, has Tourette syndrome. I just had 2 new grandchildren born this month, so now I have 9 grandchildren. My second, see, that's accomplishment, right?
Yes.
My second oldest grandson has a language-based learning disability, and I had to, when he was in 1st grade, he's now in 7th grade. When he's in 1st grade, I told my children, his parents, that they had to take him out of Jewish day school because the school, with all of the best intentions, couldn't really meet his needs. And they were going to do it anyways, but that was probably the most painful thing that I have ever done. And I will live with guilt for directing my children to do that. Because even though I'm arrogant enough to say that I know that it was absolutely the right thing, it's what he needed, at the same token, who the heck am I? And he was very unhappy not going to the Jewish day school that his siblings went to. 4 siblings all going to school together, everyone getting on the school bus every morning together, and then for the next 5 years, he went off his own way. And those years started with crying for a month or 2 every single year. On the other hand, or not really the other hand, but as an update, I would say to you that last year he was in 6th grade, and he started telling his mother, my daughter, next year I'm going back to yeshiva. Next year I'm going back to Jewish day school. She didn't really think he was ready. She wasn't sure. She brushed him off for a while, but he was very persistent, and he kept going on and saying, I'm going back. So much so that finally, about mid-year last year, she said, okay, I'll go back to the school that your siblings are in. We'll speak to them. We'll see. Long story short, she went back. She met with them. They interviewed him again, and they said they would take him back this year. And he's back this year in 7th grade. Doing well. More importantly, in the span of half a year, you just see a different personality. So why am I telling you all of this? It's because I think when we talk about inclusion and we talk about law and we talk about all of these things, we sometimes forget the huge impact that being included, one of the early panelists spoke about belonging, that what impact that has in such great significance for the individual child or adult, and what impact it has when they are secluded or excluded. So with that introduction, let me just share with you some perspectives, if you will, on inclusion from a Jewish perspective. Now, I don't represent the Jewish community, so take what I say with a grain of salt. I've worked in the Jewish community. I serve the Jewish community. But these are my perspectives. I'd like to look at 3 pathways, if you will. The religious perspective, the communal perspective, and the educational perspective. I think the most important thing that we need to remember, and I suspect this is true for all religions, but I will say with some authority that it's true for Judaism. There's Judaism, and there are Jews. They don't always line up. They don't always align. We don't always, meet, if you will, the requirements or the aspirations that Judaism, I believe, holds for us. So religiously, on the one hand, it's very clear to me that the Torah, the Bible, the covenant between the Jewish people and God, what governs Judaism, essentially, is very clear on the concept of kavod habriot, the respect for all human beings, regardless of challenges, strengths, race, religion, doesn't matter. The Torah is very clear on the ultimate dignity and respect that is to be accorded to all human beings. In the opening verses of Genesis, of Bereshit, the Torah says that man, person, human beings were created b'tselem Elokim, in the image of God, all human beings. And therefore the respect that we accord to God, hopefully, is the same kind of respect that we're supposed to accord to each other. Do we always do that? Regrettably not, but we're trying. So religiously, I think, if you looked at the Jewish community in terms of its religious denominations and synagogues and practice, 50 years ago, 25 years ago to today, I think we've made some real progress, but it largely matters as to who is the rabbi, who is the communal leader, who are the congregants, what are people asking for? So have we made progress? Yes. Do we still have a long way to go? Yes. Do we have sign language going on in services? Sometimes, mostly not. And maybe it's important to point out that expression, money makes the world go round. So money doesn't make the world go round. I actually think that it's attitude that makes the world go round. But money does drive the engine to a large extent. And so much of what we do in terms of promoting inclusion or its opposite, or keeping things the way they are, does have to do with money, or maybe better put, our attitudes towards money. And religiously, it's no different. It's interesting, I think in just the last session, one of the speakers spoke about ADA, right, which is the American legal basis for disability, for inclusion and the rights of people with disabilities. And she mentioned, and I think it has to be emphasized, that when ADA was being discussed and being passed, the religious community, this is all religions to the best of my knowledge, certainly the entire Jewish community religiously, the Orthodox community, the conservative community, the Reform community, the Reconstructionist community, all denominations within Judaism went to Washington and basically said, this is great. ADA, we're all in. We support 100%, except we don't want to be bound to the legal mandates of ADA. It's too expensive. We can't afford to put ramps in every synagogue. We can't afford to have interpretation for all services. So you see, on the one hand, in that snapshot, on the one hand, and they genuinely supported ADA and genuinely wanted to move the religious community forward and the community as a whole forward towards more inclusion. And at the same time, they had no difficulty compartmentalizing and saying, but we in our synagogue, we can't mandate it because it's just too expensive. You know what? Really? Really? It's expensive, absolutely. So we have to make decisions. What are our priorities? Clearly, at that point in time, it wasn't a priority. Which goes to talk about, I think, the strengths and limitations of law. The religious perspective. Let's talk about the communal perspective, right? What about what goes on in the Jewish community, in the organizations that reflect and sometimes represent different parts of the Jewish community? So there, I think it's largely similar to what we experience in the religious community. I think we've made progress. I think we're moving forward. I think we do see much more services to support people with a wide variety of disabilities. Still much more uncomfortable with emotional disability, but in terms of physical challenges and challenges of that sort, we are making progress, but there too, we still have a long way to go. So yes, we have more ramps. Yes, we have more elevators. Yes, we have interpretation sometimes, but certainly not consistently, not enough, and a lot will depend on who are the professional leaders in a given community, who are the lay leaders in a given community. And now let's turn to the last piece, which is educational perspectives. And here's where I really have the most to say. The Jewish community has a fairly large, robust Jewish day school system. Well over 600 Jewish day schools across North America. And hundreds of thousands of children attend those day schools. It wasn't so long ago where there was really very little inclusion for children with special needs. And I'm talking about the full gamut of special needs. I'm talking about not just intellectual disability or emotional disability, but even learning disabilities. I started off just a few minutes ago sharing with you about my grandson. That was 6 years ago, when his day school, which made efforts to support him with his language-based learning disability, could not marshal the resources to effectively support him, help him to learn strategies, to develop his reading skills, to remediate against dyslexia and the challenges that he experienced. He had to go to a special school in order to do that. But I will tell you this, the school was willing to make an effort 6 years ago. They failed, but they made an effort. 25 years ago, a child with this profile would not have been allowed into the school. And 25 years ago, that family coming back to the school 6 years later and saying, we think our son is ready, will you consider him, wouldn't have happened. This time it happened, and not only did it happen, he went back. And I want to tell you something, which I think is fascinating. I spoke to the head of school really a few months ago, and in a rare moment of transparency, he shared with me that they were really concerned about how Teddy, my grandson, how he would do. They wanted to give him the chance, but it sounded like my numbers, 50-50, was the way they looked at it. 50, we're gonna put forth some effort, and we're gonna work with the family, we're gonna try, but it's a crapshoot. Maybe we will be successful with Teddy, maybe we won't be. And they were surprised, he went on to share, at just how well he returned, at how well he was doing, far beyond what they thought, because we still think in very black and white terms, in very concrete terms. If you've got a learning disability, well, you must not be very smart. In point of fact, he's very intelligent. In point of fact, he's in the honors math program. But at first, they were going to put him in a regular class for math. And then we went back to them and said, but here's an area of real strength for him. Why will you put him in the average class? Well, there's also word problems in math and language and so on. We know, but we're telling you he's so strong in math. Look at his math scores. Test him in math. Anyways, again, to their credit, I'll say, they didn't really think it was going to work, but with a little bit of push and encouragement, they exceeded, and they did it, and he's doing beautifully. So in education, we've come a long way. There are so many more programs today in the Jewish educational system to serve and support children with a wide variety of special needs. This coming September, in half a year, the community, for the first time, will open a Jewish day high school, a yeshiva high school, for students specifically with emotional challenges. Doesn't exist. There is no school under Jewish auspices that is specifically there to support children with emotional, psychological challenges. It's opening for the first time in September. So we have a wide variety and an ever-growing variety of schools, schools that specialize in a wide variety of different areas. But most of the time, those schools are separate. So are we doing more? Are we supporting more? Absolutely. Are we including more? You tell me. On the one hand, if you are supporting them, presumably we're giving these children, these students, the skills and the tools to be able to be included. But they're still, for the most part, separated. Separate classes, separate programs, separate buildings, etc. So where does that leave us? It seems to me that the changes that have happened in the Jewish community, the positive changes, the progress that we've made, has almost exclusively been led by individuals, by parents of children with challenges, by individuals with challenges that advocating for themselves. It is a bottom-up, not top-down process. At least that's the way it's been till now, and I suspect that that is the way we will achieve more over time. I have no doubt, personally, I have no doubt that Judaism, that God, dare I say, wants inclusion to the maximum degree possible. We, as frail human beings, are not completely there yet. But we, as resilient, capable, visionary human beings, and human beings who have needs for ourselves and our children, can see the possibilities. And we need to continue communicating those needs, articulating those needs, breaking down, defining those needs, and further expressing and reminding the community and the leaders of the community and our co-religionists and our co-people that every human being is created b'tselem Elokim, in the image of God, and that every human being has something to contribute. And maybe you don't know what Teddy has to contribute, but Teddy knows what he has to contribute, and if you give him the opportunity, he will contribute. So, we need to remove some of the ignorance, some of the stumbling blocks, and I want to conclude by reading to you something from Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, former chief rabbi of England, who wrote the following: "The ethics of responsibility is the idea that God invites us to become, in the rabbinic phrase, his partners in the work of creation." Partners in the work of creation. The God who created the world in love calls on us to create in love. The God who gave us the gift of freedom, and what a gift that is. The God who gave us the gift of freedom asks us to use it to honor and enhance the freedom of others. To honor and enhance the freedom of others. Life, he concludes, is God's call to responsibility. So I want to suggest to you, from a Jewish perspective, Judaism says that we have a responsibility, each and every one of us, a call to be responsible for ourselves and to be responsible for everyone else who is part of the Jewish community, and dare I say, everyone else who is a human being. We have a responsibility to honor, respect, and enhance the freedom of others. And I know, or I believe, I don't know, but I believe that in life, it's all about attitude. Anything is possible. Not everything, but anything. And each and every one of us together, each and every one of you, have the capacity to influence and enhance and respect the rights of others, and that has a cascade effect. So Nike said it very well. Just do it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lichtman. That was inspiring. Our next panelist is Ruth Pack-Adler, an attorney with Abdour, Weiker, and she does a lot of special education work in Ohio. I am eager to hear what she has to say.
Thank you. Very difficult people to follow. I did prepare a PowerPoint and had a whole plan of how I was going to proceed today. And I've got to say, the talk, people's lived experiences, what we've just heard, what you're working on with students is going to somewhat change what I'm going to talk about today. Because I came here, Professor Levine asked me to first just attend and then asked me to speak. And I want to let you know that I saw this as a networking opportunity for me in an area that I'm very passionate about. If some of your students are here today, 30 years ago, I was a 3L. I went to law school after spending 2 years as a public school teacher in Dade County, Florida. And I went to law school thinking I would prosecute juvenile offenders. You can make of that what you will. It was the late 1989, early 1990 in Dade County. Had some really tough students. Said, I'm going to law school because I want to prosecute juvenile offenders. And then life happens, and you go to law school, and you graduate law school, in my case, 30 years ago as a 3L, quite pregnant with my first child, then living in Columbus, Ohio. I had difficulty finding a job part-time, and I only wanted to work part-time. And where did I find a job? But with a sole practitioner who was a juvenile criminal defense attorney. And so he took me on, he taught me so much, and my world kind of flipped entirely on its face. Right around that time, practicing in the juvenile courts, we started seeing a lot of what we would call unmet needs. What was a commonality for lots of our students facing criminal prosecution in the juvenile courts? Things that I'll now call dumb, but we know they're not dumb. Calling in threats to the school, a lot of truancy, kids just really struggling at school. And he challenged me to look at the nexus between what was going on, what were those unmet educational needs that were causing these students to act out at school. It's about 3 years later now. I find myself pregnant with my second child, and I think a couple people have alluded to it. We make plans, and God may have other plans for us. My child was born 10 weeks early. And so when we look at what's our why, she is my why. She is now 26 years old, a graduate of, am I allowed to say Yeshiva University here? A graduate of Yeshiva University with a degree in Jewish education. But I took 10 years off from the practice of law to devote to her. I went to OT and PT and speech therapy and equestrian therapy and put my entire law career on hold. But what happened then is I also became a really good advocate for my child. I started working with families pro bono because I myself knew at the time the last thing anybody can afford is to hire an attorney to go to kindergarten or that first meeting before your child starts school, pay an attorney an hourly rate to advocate what she was entitled to begin with. I did it pro bono for a very long time. I'd be on the phone late at night with people calling me, asking me if I could review their children's school data, give some guidance on IEPs. My husband told me, wouldn't it be great if you could actually make a living at this? But there were no school-side lawyers. There were no parent-side lawyers at the time, 25, even 20 years ago. I'll fast forward. I took a very odd detour into corporate compliance because that also allowed me to work part-time and continue to dedicate myself to my daughter and my son. And it was good work, better paying work for any of you thinking about going into special education advocacy. It's a passion of the heart, but not necessarily of the wallet. And I was never really happy in corporate compliance, and advocacy always was in the background. We found ourselves about 4 years ago. My reason for being here was getting ready to graduate over in Manhattan, and I thought, you know what, now it's time for me to return to what my passion is. And I reached out to a gentleman who had started about 8 years earlier, the only student rights firm in the Midwest. Today, we probably are still one of the very few law firms that practice exclusively in students' rights. We're 10 attorneys and 1 advocate. We operate in Ohio, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Partner of our firm told us he'd like to be in 10 states in the next 10 years, so for your students, it's definitely needed. There are very few attorneys out there who are dedicating their lives to working specifically for students. I was going to give some examples because we always like to talk about the kind of work we do and some case studies. We have students pre-kindergarten that we help get set up with support, meet with school districts, all the way through graduate professional programs. Some of the work is IEP 504 plan related. We work hand in hand with our advocate. It's often a much more cost-effective way for families to tap into services and have somebody kind of keeping the schools accountable. The schools still always have lawyers on their side, and the parents don't. And the parents really need it. Oftentimes, it is a battle. We go to due process in the Midwest much more often than we should. So hopefully with more advocacy and more attorneys helping parents, we'll see less of that. My plan was to talk some trends today, K-12 disciplinary rights, students with disabilities either noted on a 504 plan or an IEP get kind of an extra step in the process, the manifestation determination review process. This is an entitlement where we look at whether or not the behavior for which the student is going to be put out of school for 10 or more days a year was a manifestation of their disability. Some of the other things I heard talk about today, and I'm just going to put this out there as a trend, this kind of notion that ADHD or ADD looks a certain way, and you sit in that room at that manifestation determination for a kid who's said something, done something, acted a certain way, and there will be educators at that table who will say to you, it wasn't impulsive, he thought about it. So I want to challenge all of you as advocates yourselves in whatever capacity, parents, professionals. Nothing, you said it yourself, you've met one person with autism, you've met one person. It's the same for all of the other conditions that a specific student finds in their situation. So I want to challenge that notion. It's an unfortunate trend that we're seeing where the perception is the behavior and the discipline are not necessarily connected to disability. The big trend for me here in this space is educating the educators. Really digging in on that student's medical profile, their background, and how what's going on in their life impacts their behavior at school. I'm going to skip ahead because the next topic is one that is happening a lot. School-based criminal charges. So of all those attorneys that you saw there, there's myself for Ohio and one other for Michigan. We handle our juvenile criminal work that emanates out of education. The big trends, the huge trends right now are assault and truancy in our practice. I don't know if it's nationwide. Ohio recently said any touching of a staff member can be charged as a felony level assault. So we have students 7 years old, 12 years old, restrained, secluded. They respond by being escalated in their behavior. If they make contact with the school bus driver trying to break up the fight, or the school resource officer trying to restrain and seclude, that child, even down to age 7, can be charged with a felony in the state of Ohio. We've got to fight against that. We've got to be able to bring that concept of manifestation into the courtroom. We've had a lot of success with it, but it's an unfortunate thing that we have to deal with, and again, incredibly costly for parents. Truancy is my new pet project. I don't know how many of you practice right now in this field. The uptick in school avoidance specifically for our students who are neurodiverse, the overwhelming anxiety of being at school. We can talk about cell phones, that's probably a whole day conversation. Ohio, we no longer allow students to have cell phones. We've seen in our practice a decline in the number of students calling us who need help for threatening behavior at school because we don't have that cell phone, sort of like the vape sensor taking away all the vapors. They're not vaping, they're just not vaping in the bathroom. But truancy is on the rise, driven a lot by school avoidance. We believe there's a nexus to that ban on cell phones, that device that people are so addicted to, us included, as a crutch. Our advocate will say it's a dopamine fix to have that cell phone in your pocket. We don't want to tell families that the only way to get away from the truancy is to either guarantee that my kid who's been struggling all year is going to all of a sudden be able to get back to school tomorrow because you brought them to court, or withdraw that child from school and homeschool them. They're not good options. There has to be a better partnership with schools to get to the root of why students are avoiding school with greater and greater numbers. We're seeing it starting around 5th grade. That's a big trend. And then one quick section on college disability rights, and I think when Professor Levine called me, this was a project I'm working on. I would love to partner with folks here who have ideas about how we get our students who have special education needs all through K-12, we get them to that college degree, and then what? What happens? What happens in the workforce when we can't find those pathways? And many speakers have talked about what a large number of people ask for accommodations at work. Some of our students now, workplaces can't accommodate. I'd love to talk to you, Professor. Education. I think the field of education, I have a case, my one case study that I was going to talk about. Students who pursue degrees in education at the collegiate level. I've had a student put on a performance improvement plan that focused almost entirely on characteristics that we would associate with neurodiversity. How can I put that student in a student teaching role because he doesn't make eye contact when I give him feedback? Or how do I know that he's not going to fidget with his shirt collar in a classroom full of junior high girls? We've got to figure out ways to help these students, and I know we have new Jewish day schools that are developing focused specific to disability and support. But how do we support our college students? Because I want that representation. I want those kids that I'm helping now, K-12 and college, to be able to go into the workforce and inspire and do all the things everybody here has done today, but I don't think we haven't found the right path yet. So I'd love to work with your students. I'd love to talk to any of you who have ideas. And I hope through this conference we're just able to reach more people who say, you know what, I can see a path to helping or developing myself as an advocate. And I'd love more lawyers to be out there helping students. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. That was incredibly thought-provoking, and certainly the trends you articulated resonate very deeply, I think, with me and with the students in my clinic. So the NCLE code that I wanted to share with all of you, as U as in under, D as in dad, H as in Harry, 645. That's UDH 645. I'm not sure if we have time for questions. Okay, so we're going to have one or two questions from the audience.
Give me 1 second. Hi, my name is Lucille, and I am in-house counsel for a very large retailer. And something that struck me as all of you were speaking is the importance of education for students who have disabilities and its future impacts on those students when they join the workforce. So what is not accommodated in education, somebody's going to have to accommodate later, right? So it doesn't just stay there, it moves on to us as well. So Ms. Pack-Adler, mainly to you, but also to the other panelists, about this really being a flow and not a segmented way of approaching students who will then become members of society and our employees.
I actually think it's a pretty easy model, and it's a mentorship model. Lots of teaching roles. I focus on teaching a lot. My daughter has a degree in education. Not everybody can graduate college with a degree in hand and step into that role that you've advertised fully without a mentor, without a partnership, without the ability to shadow. So I think a lot of roles, even in corporate America, would benefit, kind of like when you move to a new city and they set you up with somebody, at least we do that in the Jewish community. You get a family mentor, a community mentor. Could we envision a world where first year out of college or first year in the workforce, we could set up a more supportive entry point rather than day one, you're dropped in, they give you the manual, and they tell you to, do all the compliance classes so you can get started. So my hope is that mentorship is really the future, or co-working situations, at least for the first few months or a year, to get people more comfortable with corporate culture.
Thank you.
All right, I have a question from the Zoom.
It's okay.
So, how does a person with disabilities confront uneven power dynamics when empathy is used as coercion? In other words, when there are people who mean well, but they think they understand, they're neurotypical, but they don't necessarily truly have an understanding, but they think they do, and they're using empathy as coercion.
Okay. I think that, look, every situation is unique, every individual is unique, so it's really hard to address this. It seems to me that, and this relates to the earlier question also, I can tell you that in the university, in Touro University, and this is true for other universities as well, we're experiencing a difficult shift in culture, because the students who are coming to undergraduate colleges and to graduate schools have grown up in an era where there were support services in their public schools or private schools, in the school system through elementary school and high school that they went through. Although their professors, their instructors largely grew up in a different system. And therein lies the rub, right? But it's rubbing. And students, and sometimes even their parents, even at the collegiate level, are pushing for and advocating for, and that's what needs to continue happening. I think one of the things that would be helpful here also is, I think we need to, while students are in middle school and high school, we need to focus more, not just on remediation around the particular challenges that they may have, but on self-advocacy skills. It's far more effective for a student to speak to a professor or to speak to a university than it is for their parent to speak for the university. Far more effective. And there are students who do have those skills, but we need more students to have those skills. And then I would bring it back to this question, say, in the same sort of way, I think that we need to, with patience, with humor, with tolerance for the ignorance of the people around us. Let's not fault them. We didn't, they don't have what we have, what I have, what I'm experiencing. Okay, so it's my job, sometimes painfully, sometimes with lots of frustration, to take a step back, to take a deep breath, and explain to them for the 33rd time, or maybe the 333rd time, why no, what you're suggesting is not helpful. Or for that matter, what you're suggesting, your understanding actually is not accurate. You cannot understand. Perhaps intellectually you can understand in certain ways, but not in other ways. So let me articulate for you what it is that I need, what it is that I want, the kinds of supports, and how it would be that you would be helpful to me. But it takes a certain kind of persistence and drive, and it also takes skills in the where and when of advocating for yourself. I hope that somewhat answers.
Couple questions over here.
Thank you so much to all of you for being here today.
Sorry.
Please go ahead.
Bravo.
My name is Nathan Weisler, and I'm a self-advocate and a recent college graduate. I was thinking about what you were saying about people with different special needs in the context of employment, and I was thinking about your classroom example, and in that setting, I was wondering, do you think it would be effective on the first day, using the classroom example to tell the students, I'm very excited to work with you. I also have some challenges that might make things a little bit harder, and this is not an excuse, and I will never use this as an excuse, but I just want to be upfront with you. In my mind, even though it's not an excuse, it might make certain things a little less awkward if mistakes do happen, and I just wanted to just ask your thoughts about that.
I love that idea, if that's something you're comfortable disclosing. I think there's power in community. I think we've all talked about that and that shared experience. So I think that would be a wonderful way to open the conversation. And I wish you a lot of success. Congratulations on your recent graduation.
I'm just going to add, first of all, ditto, congratulations on graduation. I see it a little bit more, not cynically, but I think realistically. I think that's a strategy, but I would be careful about employing it on day one. Okay? I think we're not there yet. People are not open to hearing necessarily. What changes people more than anything else, I think, is meaningful contact and interaction. So what I might suggest is first get the lay of the land, so to speak. Understand with some time and interaction who your classmates are, who the other people in this setting are, and in turn, hopefully let them get a taste of who you are, and then at the right moment, right? Sometimes hard to figure out, but looking for the right moment to figure out when to disclose. So I think as a strategy, disclosure is yes, I think we need to. You need to articulate, but I would be careful about when. Timing is significant.
I want to thank the panel for...
We have one more brief question over here.
See me after class if you want to understand the empathy thing better. I can explain it. Very few people can, but I can explain it. We had to hire attorneys twice for my younger son in high school and in college. If there's one thing I would beg the legal community, it would be to fight back and not to back down and broker a deal. I still have a lot of residual anger because our attorneys in both cases brokered a deal as opposed to call out what was wrong. And one of the things that was great about hearing Ruth, because she expressed some of the iniquities in the system and what that can lead to. So please don't broker deals, please fight. Even if you just have to express it and take a deal, at least say, this is wrong, on behalf of the parents. Thanks.
Unfortunately, I know there are more questions, and I certainly have my own, but we've run out of time for this incredible